without further ado, I'm going to welcome our geopolitical panel. I'll introduce them all in one hit and then invite them to join me on stage. So firstly, I'll be welcoming back Sanna Marin on our panel. Joining Sanna in conversation is Bruno Maçães, the philosopher, a journalist, a politician, and a consultant and author. He's the former Secretary of State for European Affairs in Portugal, and he's the author of 4 books, many more to come, no doubt. The next book that's coming in February is titled World Builders, and he's also preparing the second part to History Has Begun, which is his 2020 book on virtualism. He's got some really interesting insights to share from having spent the last 12 months as a foreign correspondent on the ground in the Ukraine and the Middle East many times over for The New Statesman. And our third panellist, joining Bruno and Sanna, is Jeff Navin, who's the co-founder of Boundary Stone Partners and the Director of External Affairs for TerraPower. His work at BSP builds on 20 years of experience in politics, government, and advocacy, and he served at the highest levels of government. He was, in fact, Chief of Staff of the US Department of Energy for a period of time, where he managed the highest profile issues facing an agency with a whopping $30 billion budget. With that, can you join me in welcoming Bruno, Sanna, and Jeff to stage to join me in conversation? All right. Welcome back. Welcome all to Energy Disruptors. It's wonderful to have you here and to have the opportunity to delve a little deeper into the geopolitical conversation. Now, Bruno and Jeff, I might give you first bite at the apple here, given we've had the benefit of hearing a little bit of Sanna's perspective on the state of the world. We've titled part of this panel conversation The New World Order. And I'm interested, just as an opener, to get your sense on the energy transition. Is it shaping the New World Order, or is the New World Order shaping it? Jeff, I'm going to come to you first. What's your take?
I think the answer is yes. It has been such, for people who've worked in energy for many decades, it's almost an unrecognizable space. And even if you think about where we were a year ago, in the developed world, right, we were in this substitution regime, right, where we were talking about taking dirty energy offline, replacing it with clean, and it was going to be very hard to meet our carbon targets, to get to our net zero targets in that regime, especially places like the US and Canada that rely very heavily on fossil energy, to meet our needs. Now we're actually seeing that substitution regime. You have an addition piece on top of it, right? In the United States, at least, largely driven by the growth of demand from AI. Sam Altman from OpenAI was in Washington last week, and that one organization, OpenAI, wants 5 gigawatts of firm, clean power by 2030, right? Then you put Google on top of that.
Give us some context for that, Jeff. How big is that?
That is millions of homes, right? That is like a large city of demand, right? Those big nuclear power plants, like the one that we just brought online in Georgia, those are about a gigawatt, a little over a gigawatt, so you need 4 or 5 of those. Those took like 10 years to build, right? Wow. So getting to that is really, really challenging. We were having a tough time getting enough renewables and clean energy sources online just to meet that substitution framework. When you put the addition on, it's going to really challenge the system. But I hope also create some opportunities. We're now seeing investors coming on board that were sitting on the sidelines previously, and bringing some of these, the balance sheets of these tech companies are massive. That's billions and billions of dollars, and if they can help put that into the energy transition, it could be an opportunity to actually move things quicker.
Bruno, one of the things you've written a lot about is this geopolitical multiverse that we find ourselves in. So the New World Order looks different to the world order of old. Love your characterization of sort of where we are at this moment in time.
I think I've changed my mind a little bit on this. I used to think 5 years ago that this multipolar, fragmented, more distributed world order was simply a result of the rise of the West and not a result of the West's decline. I think slowly, gradually, I've come to change my mind on this point. I think it's happening, but I think it's very much a result of the West's decline, I'm sorry to say, as much as we may dislike that. Inability to innovate, inability to organize, inability to think in a very comprehensive, holistic way about the world, inability to compromise, I think, when it comes to foreign policy. But it's happening, and I think the challenge here is less Russia, of course, less Iran, and it's much more China. I lived in China for 2 years. I saw that there's enormous energy in going forward and in transforming the world order. Energy in the sense of motivation and organization, but I think energy in the sense of this conference is very important. I'm convinced that different world orders are always based on, or for at least in the modern times, based on new sources of energy and new sources of organized economy. Why did the British rise to world prominence? It was very much about coal and very much about the steam engine and how the two work together. Why did America do the same at the beginning of the 20th century? It was very much about the complex formed by electricity and the assembly line and the modern factory. And I think now we have a new complex, which is formed by nuclear solar. I'm more on solar, maybe you're more on nuclear, we can talk about that later, combined with AI. And it's already very clear that AI is going to need new sources of energy, cheaper energy, and abundant energy, and we don't have right now that source of abundant energy that will power AI.
Absolutely not. Sanna, I'm interested for your perspective, adding into what Jeff and Bruno have already said there. We've watched, and you've watched up close and personal, this diversification of the world energy system away from fossil fuel-dominated economies now to a much more diversified set of energy sources. How broadly do you think that this transition is changing the global political power balance?
Well, I think there are many trends that are changing the power balance, and I think we are living in geopolitical world right now. For example, when we look at China, I've heard one person visited China, visited 10 big, I don't think it was power plants, it was like industries, 10 big factories. And he witnessed there 18 workers in total. And that gives you an idea how automized things are. And this is something that we don't perhaps realize in Europe or in the US or in Canada in the West, that how much they are actually investing in new technologies, automation, new technologies in general. And I think we are lacking behind. And when I mentioned earlier Finnish goal of the R&D funding, I think that's crucial, and I think the world would be a very different place if we would all put our money now to education, research, development, innovation. It's crucial that we stay competitive and that we will have also the tools and the means in the future to control the world-class technological solutions that we will be using. And I think we should take very seriously what is happening to China, what is happening to authoritarian countries. President Xi just had another speech where he said, quite frankly, that Taiwan is part of China. Taiwan will be part of continent China. And I think China will go to Taiwan. And then what will happen to the world economy, to our industries? We are all using the semiconductors that comes from Taiwanese manufacturers. And what will happen? Our economies will cripple if we don't have the tools and the means and the technology that we are using in our factories, in our industries. So I think it's a geopolitical world, and these authoritarian regimes will use everything against us from their ideological perspective, and they have very, very different logic than the Western countries and democracies have. And I think this was the mistake that we made with Russia. We thought that they ultimately think like we do, that they will appreciate the economic relations and the trade that we had together. And that's why many European countries built their whole energy system based on Russian gas and oil. And what happened? Putin used that energy leverage against Europe, so attacking Ukraine, but actually using the energy as a weapon towards the whole European market and whole bunch of European countries. And I think we should look at the world the same way, that these tools, whether it's semiconductors or energy or natural resources that we are using from authoritarian countries, they have very different logic than we do, and they won't be afraid of using those tools and means against us if we don't have the resilience and if we don't have the preparedness for that.
So a bit of a common theme between you and Bruno there, and things the West needs to wake up to or quickly seek to redress. You described it as a geopolitical world. Bruno, one of the pieces you wrote recently sharing observations from your time over the last year, spending a lot of time on the ground in the Ukraine and the Middle East. You characterised this moment in time as the age of danger. Can I ask you, particularly with events overnight with Israel, can you just take us to why that term for this moment, and what does that mean? When you paint that kind of bleak outlook for the West, do you have hopes of a stabilisation? Because the age of danger makes me think that you're perhaps not the glass half full optimist that Sanna is, or self-described earlier.
Right, I think I told you yesterday that that piece was a cover piece for the New Statesman. I wanted to call it the age of destruction, and my editor said, you know, let's be a little less...
a little softer?
Let's be a little softer here and call it the age of danger. So it's even worse than that. What I've been seeing is a gradual unraveling of the world order, inability to keep order, many actors that are decided to destroy what we have to build something new. They're not happy with what we have. The West's responsibility here, I think, is both in some sense to defend the world order as it exists, but also to allow it to evolve and to include other actors. It's simply the case that we need to create a new global order that has space, for example, for Africa. It's been now 60, 70, 80 years since decolonization, and it's very clear. You don't have to go to Africa and talk to people there. It's very clear that we still have not been able to create a world economic order where Africa has its deserved space. So we can't then complain when things don't work out. But what I've seen in Ukraine is, on the one hand, there was a lot of reluctance to support Ukraine when it was most decisive. I think if the support that was offered later had been offered before February 2022, it's quite possible that Russia would not have invaded if it knew that it would find HIMARS there. But before February 2022, you remember, Sanna, we were offering them at most some Javelin anti-tank missiles, and we were preparing Ukraine for a guerrilla war. So that was a big mistake. Then throughout 2022, we should have offered more support, but it was all slow. And now I'm afraid we are at a moment when we should realize that, in fact, the West is at war with Russia. There's a lot of reluctance to recognize this, but I think it would be the honest position to say that. Now, war can be kept under constraints. Many wars are kept under constraints, under limits, and we have to be concerned about that. But we allow things to evolve to a point where it's no longer possible to speak of a special military operation if you're Russian, but it's also not possible to speak of a special logistical operation if you're European or American. This is not a special logistical operation. We're offering some support. We are part of this conflict. Now we have to win it while keeping it under some well-understood constraints, which are necessary when the power on the other side is a nuclear power.
Jeff, I'm watching you nod while Bruno's talking. I'd love your thoughts on his comments there, but equally, love if you could take us to this critical juncture the US finds itself at this year. Presidential election, right. You know, just over a month away, two strikingly different candidates. Can you just paint a picture for us around what an election outcome either way might look like for the state of the energy world order?
Yeah, there is an election in the United States.
You might have heard.
If anyone has seen that, coming up in a little over a month. I think to Bruno's point, this global order is not just under attack from countries outside of the West. There is a pretty concerted effort from inside, right? You're seeing this with populism rising throughout Europe. You're seeing this within the United States as well. You know, we were talking before this, Bruno was at a Trump rally, you know, that there is not a lot of support in a Trump rally for continuing U.S. support of the war in Ukraine, of NATO, or even just general engagement, you know, globally. And part of that is making sure that that the system works for the people within the developed world, not just outside of the developed world. And I think that's something that we as center-left political thinkers have to make sure that we're thinking about. It's a very consequential election. I mean, I think, you know, I don't think you can sugarcoat it. We know, we have a very good idea of what Trump will do. I think he will take the things that he tried to do in the first term, be more aggressive, more assertive, and likely more effective because he has much more experience. We were in some ways, I think, he wasn't able to get as much done because he just didn't have the team around him who knew how government worked. That will not be the problem for him this time around. You know, even on the left, the Biden administration and with Harris, you know, you've seen a very different kind of democratic government, right? There is industrial policy in the United States. We are a protectionist country, both parties. You cannot be harder on, you can't be too hard on China with the U.S. electorate and all of these competitiveness issues. I think the general difference, though, globally, is that Kamala Harris believes that the United States needs to play an important leadership role in partnership with our allies in the West to protect institutions like NATO, to strengthen some of the relationships we have with allies through things like AUKUS, which is the Australia, UK, bringing in Korea, bringing in Japan into some of those agreements. Trump does not think that way. Well, about Trump, it's building the metaphorical wall, not just at the Mexican border, but all the way around the country, and really just trying to withdraw the U.S. At a time when I think that leadership is really, really needed. So it's a very, very consequential election on particularly sort of how the U.S. engages with the rest of the world.
Sanna, I think you might be the only panellist who's spent time with both candidates for US president. Any observations or reflections to add in to what Jeff shared there?
Well, of course, I'm not a US citizen, so I don't vote in the elections, and I think the elections is for the citizens to decide themselves. I look at the elections from outsider perspective, and I especially worry as a European what will happen to US involvement in global organizations like the UN, NATO, our alliances. What will happen if Trump will win? Will there be withdrawal from these organizations? Because nowadays, and especially now in the world, we need strong US, and we need strong US presence in the world stage, not less, because there is this war of values going on in the world. There is this axis of evil that is rising, authoritarian countries. We are seeing war in Ukraine, war in Europe. Today, we are seeing more restlessness in the Middle East, and there is more to become. And I think that people have the tendency, wanted to believe, like, maybe things will go smoothly. Maybe we will go back to normal. But I'm telling you right now that there's no normal to go back to. The world has changed, and it's changed radically. And I think the West and democratic countries have a problem with realizing what is really happening. And I see also, unfortunately, not enough courage within the world leaders nowadays to realize what is happening in Ukraine. What is the world really about? It's about questioning the whole rule-based order, and Ukraine is only a forefront. And I'm seeing not enough willingness to actually see that we are part, like you said, that we are part of this war, whether we want it or not. And if we don't act, and if we don't help Ukraine to win the war, there will be consequences. And we don't like those consequences. If Russia would gain land and victory in Ukraine, we would only see decades and decades of war ahead. I think Russia would go next to Moldova, then to Western Balkans. We would have this restlessness within the European continent constantly in the future. And our only, I think our only chance is actually to stop Putin in Ukraine, to make sure that Ukraine will win the war and send the strong message to authoritarian regimes and countries out there that it doesn't pay off to attack another country, that there will be consequences that will be, of course, in the form of losing the war, but there will also be economic consequences. And I don't think that we would have witnessed this war bursting in Europe if we would have acted differently 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. After that, they just looked like some sanctions, okay, but no real reaction from the international community, no real reaction from European Union. Okay, well, let's go to Ukraine. I don't see that we have seen full-fledged war in Ukraine if we would have acted more strongly and more courageously in 2014. And right now, I'm afraid that if we don't have the courage to stop Putin in Ukraine together, that we could send them enough arms, enough support that they need to stop Putin. But if we don't do that, then we will only see this misery path ahead of us. And if we were able to stop them, then we would see a different kind of strong democratic future. Of course, there will be difficultness, but I think the West and democratic countries should be more strong, and we should stand by our values and not look the world in a normality-biased way, like maybe things will go smoothly and maybe things will continue as normal as we used to. I don't think the world is like that, and that's why I said, like, I'm a realist. I see the world the way it is, quite nasty place, and if we just recognize this, then we can do better. We can do better. We can stop Putin, and Ukraine can win the war, and we can have the bright future ahead of us, and we are really living in a historical moment right now. This is like the Second World War historical moment, where things can go like super sour or then we can create better future for everybody.
Bruno, your thoughts?
I think we need more courage to defend our values, but we also need more courage to defend those values in our own conduct. And here, let me add a little note on Israel and Gaza. I think we should, and it's still, I don't know if it is too late or not too late, but we should have done more to protect civilians in Gaza. And I have been quite shocked by the American position on this. There should have been a very clear affirmation that this war is against Hamas, it's not against children in Gaza. And we know that 10,000, 20,000, maybe by the end of this, 30, 40,000 children have been killed in Gaza. And then I was also very shocked when the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor, asked for arrest warrants to be issued against Netanyahu and his defense minister, that the reaction from President Biden was, this is outrageous. Do you know what the reaction was when the same International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against Putin? That it was a celebration of international law. So it can't be a celebration of international law and then outrageous when it's about our side. I think the two things have to go together. If we truly believe in these values, we have to defend them in Ukraine, and we have to defend them with weapons. But if we truly believe with them, we have also to implement them in our conduct. And the two things, the two pillars of the global order are failing at the same time. Not enough courage, but not enough principles either.
I agree. Jeff, I want to come to you. I'm watching you nod. Please, by all means. You said something to me yesterday when we were talking about the energy market that I think has a relationship there to sort of the multitudes that we need to hold, the tension that we need to hold that Bruno acknowledged there. You were saying that people want, economists, engineers, want efficient solutions. Government is inherently messy. Can you just talk us through, as someone who's worked for many, many years in public life, the complexity of the stakeholder landscape and how we as leaders need to move forward and bring to the point, like we've got, you acknowledged earlier, got tension outside of our countries, but we've equally got this contested landscape inside that makes it very difficult to take a position outside of it. How do we navigate that complex stakeholder environment?
Yeah, you know, the energy sector tends to be made up by a lot of engineers, maybe a few in the audience even, that, you know, want elegant, efficient, beautiful solutions to things. That is not how representative democracy and policymaking works, right? Politics is the art of the possible. It's about taking conflicting things, putting them together, trying to come up with something that works rather than something that's perfect, right? And one of the things that comes up many times, and my unpopular opinion, is that a carbon tax is an ineffective policy to address climate change. And the reason is that it can't pass. And a policy that doesn't get enacted doesn't have an effect, right? So if you look at what the United States did with the Inflation Reduction Act, it worked to make clean energy cheaper than dirty energy, not make dirty energy more expensive than clean energy. Why does that matter? Well, in places in the US, going all the way back into 1993, the first action that Congress tried to take on climate was a BTU tax, a tax on energy. And it cost the Democrats the House of Representatives in the next election. Why? Because people care more about their own economic situation and what they're paying for things than they do about solving these amorphous problems, right? We saw the yellow vests in France. We've seen the rise, in some cases, I think you can point to some of the rise of right-wing populism in Europe due to policies that are designed to help solve these big issues, but they end up hitting working people very, very hard because they're so sensitive to the cost of electricity, right? You can track it. Historically in the United States, presidential approval ratings tend to track gasoline prices, right? So even though the president has very little to do with those prices, it's something that people can see. It's almost like a scoreboard every time they go to fill up their car, right? So we have now created a system in the United States that's almost all carrots, very few sticks, right? A lot of incentives designed to take things like wind, solar, low carbon liquid fuels, all of these things that we're going to need to solve the energy climate crisis, to make them cheaper by subsidizing them, right? How does that fit into a framework in Europe where, you know, the EU is never going to be able to match the subsidies that the US has, and it's very much a system of sticks. What's the biggest issue in Europe? I'll defer to you guys since you live there, but a lot of concern about deindustrialization, right? So if you don't solve deindustrialization by raising prices. So there is this tension between we have to move so fast to solve the climate crisis. There are tools out there that could maybe get us there faster. But if we lose all of these institutional support, if people feel like their governments aren't meeting them where they are and meeting their needs, over time, we might end up losing. You see it in the election that we have right in the US right now, right? If we passed a carbon tax and Trump uses that to win, we would be in a very different place right now. But the fact that we're Kamala Harris is able to campaign on the investments being made in factories and manufacturing in these projects, I think is giving us a fighting chance to make climate something that appeals to working people rather than something that they feel that they are unfairly having to pay a larger percent of their household budgets to solve.
I want to take us, if we can, to technology. Bruno, you brought up AI straight out of the blocks today. Sanna, you've spoken a lot about how the future crises you believe are going to really centre around technology. And Jeff, you're working at the forefront of nuclear power, which is deemed to be a big part of the puzzle potentially for how we solve this AI race to produce the lowest cost to compute to win this next technological revolution. I'm eager to get a comment from all of you around how do you think AI and this next sort of technological revolution will impact on the energy order, but certainly on the geopolitics, sort of the intersection between those three ideas. Sanna, I might come to you first.
Well, first of all, I must say, Jeff, you're like in the core of policymaking and the problematics of these changes and how to make sure that people are involved and that they are in the same pace. And social justice, I think that's the key issue. And when we created our governmental program, it was actually to involve with the SDGs. So we wanted to make sure that we are building a country that is also not only economically, but also environmentally and socially sustainable. And I think social justice within these changes is crucially important, that you will have the continuity and you will have the support of the people for the changes that you're making. And I think one of the reasons why we were, we haven't fulfilled our climate targets yet, but we are in a good pathway to do so. I think the key issue was to make sure that people know why we are doing these things, that they are involved, and that also all the big industries and civil society were involved when we created those targets and also the roadmaps, how we would get there. So I think social justice is a key factor, and we should look at people's everyday life problems and take it very, very seriously. Or otherwise we will see a backlash on those great goals and big missions that we have. If we don't have the people's support within democracies, then nothing will ultimately happen. So social justice is very important and key on these matters. About new technologies, I think we are, like I said and mentioned before, we are in a technological race right now. And there are these new technologies that are emerging in a pace that we haven't witnessed before. I'm looking at it from a political perspective, so from a regulator perspective, from value perspective, and ethical perspective. And I think the key here is to have the cooperation and the dialogue that I mentioned earlier, the understanding what are we regulating, where are we aiming together, so have the honest conversation with the ones that are building the technologies. I could go to details within the problems that European Union have with new technologies, and especially the big companies. We have, for example, regulations that actually prevents European companies to get big enough to compete in the global level. I think this is a big problem. I understand the logic behind it. The logic is that we would have like competitive European single market, that no company would take and scoop over the whole market. So this is why the regulations are there. But when we are talking about these big new technological revolutions, AI or quantum or everything that will follow, I don't think that we can afford to be only small companies, because there are big US companies and there are like huge Chinese companies that are subsidized heavily by the Chinese government. So I think we should also look at our own logic and our own perspective and realize that the globe has changed. And especially when we talk about new technologies, we don't have the luxury to be that small that we are right now, and we have to compete with these great big countries that are subsidizing their own products and their own companies so heavily.
Jeff, I might come to you next on that because you and I had a conversation about exactly Sanna's final point there yesterday. What's your take on how technology is going to impact the energy landscape and the political order?
Well, I think the race for AI is going to be won in the next 5 years, right? And you've got Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, all of these companies, right? And they don't want to become Yahoo, MySpace, AltaVista, right? And it's very possible, right? Like if you go back, Yahoo was the biggest search engine, and now it's
thinking
a punchline,
what?
right? Right? And the thing about AI is, once you get a lead in your technology, you can't get caught because you're learning at a more rapid rate than people that are trying to catch you. The big tech companies are not going to wait for power, for clean power. They are going to go to wherever they can to get these things built to make sure that they win that race. So on the one hand, I do think it's going to mean a lot more pressure. Most of these companies, all of those companies have clean energy pledges. I think they're going to be stretched, bent, if not broken, because they're not going to wait for clean electrons to be available if it means that they might lose out on AI. On the other hand, we're seeing them now take a much greater interest in making direct investments into energy. I think they are very skeptical that, in the US at least, that the utilities are going to be able to meet the electricity demand that they're going to require to win that race. So they're thinking about alternative ways to procure and purchase their own energy systems. They don't have the answers yet, but so much is at stake, I don't think that they're going to sit back and wait. So it is a very, take a sector that has been completely disrupted because of climate change, and now we're going through the second disruption as we see this increased demand.
Some sort of interesting parallels almost with space, isn't there, in the sense of this increasing privatization of territory where we really don't have a complete set of rules that govern how we think through and operate in that area. Bruno, I'm interested for your thoughts.
So I think you've heard about the singularity, the idea of the singularity, when AI takes off and everything becomes unintelligible to human beings and very, very fast. And I wonder if in the future we're not going to remember the past 2 weeks as the moment the singularity happened. And I'm talking about Israel's attacks in Lebanon. Many, many people are puzzled about what exactly happened, and many intelligence people have told me, intelligence, not intelligent, have told me off the record, and that's why I haven't written about it, that what happened was essentially the use of AI in warfare. The Pages attack relies on AI to identify all the supply chain that Hezbollah was using big data. The data is available, you just need to find the connections, to use graph theory and to find the connections. And then the way Israel has been able to detect Hezbollah leadership wherever they are, again, you can use graph theory to find patterns and connections that the human eye cannot recognize. So I'm personally very convinced that, as Netanyahu said himself, we're using fantastic new technology. We have to get ready for a world where AI is going to be used in warfare, and warfare is not going to look like what it's looked in the past. Extraordinarily destructive, but happening at superhuman speeds. And whoever has these weapons will win a war in minutes. I think we saw that with the Pages attack. Beyond human comprehension, and if you don't have the equivalent weapons on the other side, it's simply irresistible. In some sense, these weapons may give their holders a superiority that even nuclear weapons didn't give those who had them first. And then, of course, that makes us think of how this should be regulated and promoted in places like Europe. I think we have to be very careful because we lost the internet economy in Europe because we were too naive. We thought this was a revolution like revolutions in the past. We didn't realize that the network effects were so powerful that whoever got there first was going to control the internet economy, and who got there first were the 5 big American companies, and Europeans were asleep. Now, with AI, it's going to be even worse. As you said very well, whoever gets there first then can use their own AI to accelerate, to super accelerate the process, and it's essentially impossible to catch up. It's worse than with the internet economy. Now, what should be the policy solution? I'm not sure. And as someone who still likes to consider himself a liberal, and when I was in government, I was even a super liberal, free trade is fantastic. We should have more of it. But again, I've reluctantly come to the conclusion that if we're not careful in Europe, we may become what others in the past have become, economies that are completely lost in the past. And then, of course, the political ramification of that is that you lose your freedom. If you're not part of the technological economic wave of the future, you lose your freedom.
So this has been an extraordinary geopolitical tour de force. It's also been pretty sobering. I'm probably not the only one sitting there going, geez, this outlook is a little confronting and perhaps a little bleak at times. I would love to close by asking each of you to give all of us a cause, a reason to be pragmatic optimists. How can we look at this moment and see points of light, beacons of hope, reasons to be confident that human ingenuity will find a way through as it has throughout time? Jeff, I might come to you to kick us off.
Yeah, so in my firm, Boundary Stone Partners, we work with all kinds of clean energy companies across the spectrum. And what gives me hope is when there are so many innovators, entrepreneurs, I think the smartest people in the world that are in their 20s and 30s, many of them are working to solve this problem. And they're bringing technologies to market to do things that we didn't consider possible all that long ago. Their enthusiasm, their optimism, and the fact that they're putting their collective into this question: how do we solve climate change? How do we bring these technologies to market? And if you think about what a world looks like with cheap, abundant energy that is not dependent upon geology, right? It allows countries to have their success and their economic growth be predicated on how well they educate their people, how effective they are at bringing these ideas to the forefront. And it's not just what you have under your ground that determines your economic success. That's why I do clean energy, right? Because that idea of decoupling geographic economic success for a country based upon what the geology is, I think is really transformative for the world.
It's a great reason to get out of bed every day. Bruno?
Well, maybe a little bit paradoxically, the reason to be optimistic is that the world we have and the world we had in the past few decades wasn't that great. It only looks great because we're used to it, but it's a world full of injustice, of poverty, of misery, of disease, of inequality.
I'm not getting you to write my greeting card.
So we have the opportunity to create a better world. There's a lot of dangers, but of course there's also a lot of opportunities to solve the problems that we haven't been able to solve in the past. Imagine a world of super cheap energy and super cheap intelligence. The two most expensive things you have and had always in human history. And now we're at the threshold of having those two things practically for free. In principle, it could be a beautiful moment if we manage it.
So a democratization of energy and intelligence. Sanna, bring us home.
Well, I have actually the privilege to hear Barack Obama to speak in this one event, and he said, I think, quite cleverly, that if we look at the past, and you in the audience, think at the past, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, is there anyone of you who would like to live there, 50 years ago or 100 years ago? I don't think that there are many people that would like. So I think the world today, and what Obama said as well, even though we have all these big challenges and obstacles and difficulties in the world, still, this is a better world for us than the world that we're. So we have all the opportunity to do better, and we can do better as people have always done. We have created amazing things, and we have also done very well, and we have created those international rules after the Second World War. We have built UN, and we have built also peace, not only war. So there's always opportunity to do better. And I think if we look to the future, every one of us can be part of creating that better future. And I believe in people. I believe in change. I believe in positive change. And I believe in people, that there are so many talented, amazing people out there that can really make a difference and change the world for better.
I love it. What a great note to finish on. Keep believing in people and keep building better. Can you join me in thanking my phenomenal geopolitical panel, Sanna, Bruno, and Jeff? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.